setting up your meeting for Facebook Live. I'm just reading to you so you know where we are.
That's great. I'm very grateful. I love that you were a teacher. Just keeping everyone informed. Do you hear? I don't know if you can hear the thunder, but it's wild.
Oh, but okay. Now let me take me back to my Zoom page. Get back over there. Meeting is now streaming live on Facebook. Susan,
Yay!
you are a wizard. You're a technical wizard.
I mean, I've always known that about you.
Yeah, right.
You're like the Thomas Edison of romance writers.
I know when I did my event with you, it was like totally seamless. So hi, everybody. Susan Elizabeth Phillips, and I am here with Sarah MacLean. And unless she's having an off day, you are in for a treat.
No pressure.
Sarah is one of my favorite people to talk to. And she's one of these people who's doing so many different things. We're here ostensibly talk about her brand new release, which is Daring and the Duke. But
look, I brought it.
An excuse to bring her on.
Yay.
First, hold up Daring and the Duke because it was tilted a little bit. We couldn't see it.
Oh, sorry.
I love yellow on a cover.
Me too. I've never had a yellow cover.
My first Nobody's Baby But Mine was a book that really broke loose for me, and it had a yellow cover. So I love those.
I love how bright it is. You know, you've probably done this too, although I'm sure you're better behaved than I am. But when I got the first version of it, the yellow was neon. It was like radioactive yellow. Yeah. And it just it didn't work the right way. And then bless HarperCollins, because when I was like, I changed my mind. I don't like this yellow. And it had been yellow for years because I knew, we knew the color palette for the whole series. Yeah. And they were like, you can't, what? And I was like, can you send me another yellow? And they sent me 8 or 10 different yellows. And I really think this lemon yellow is
perfect because a neon yellow can look a bit poisonous and you don't want
she's a redhead and it,
yeah. So I know that a lot of the readers who are here know about your Bareknuckle Bastards series, but not all of them do. This is the 3rd book, right?
Yes.
So this is an overview of the series.
Sure.
We'll talk about Daring and the Duke.
So the book is a 3-book series about 3 brothers who are all half brothers and bastard sons of a duke, a terrible duke, a kind of sadistic, terrible duke. And they were all born to different women. And the conceit of the sort of fairy tale conceit of the series is that they were all born to different women, but at the same hour, at the same minute, at the same hour, at the same day. So they're all equally viable for this potential to be the kind of eldest son of this duke. But he has a legitimate child, though she is not legitimate to him. She was born to his duchess and also a bastard. And her name is Grace, and she was baptized a boy. Given a boy's name and passed off to the whole world as a boy. And this sadistic duke went off and found these 3 brothers and brought them all together in a kind of Hunger Games style competition. And one of them, right, one of them would inherit the title. It's all very old school and kind of bananas. And you sort of have to
perfect
wave it away as well, this is romance. So
perfect.
And I love it. I will not apologize for it. I'm thrilled with it. So anyway, so each of the books, the heroes of each of the books are one of the brothers. And this particular hero is the Duke, is the one who won.
Wait a minute.
Yes.
So we start out with Wicked and the Wallflower.
Yes.
That's the first book.
Correct.
The second is
Brazen and the Beast.
Right. And the third is Daring and the Duke. So, according to all of your readers, I did quite a bit of snooping last night.
Oh my gosh.
Nobody thought you could pull this book off.
No one thought I didn't think I could pull it off. I'm not sure anyone ever anywhere did.
I got into the reader reviews last night.
Oh God, Susan.
No, I'm telling you, they were fantastic. And almost every review started with, I didn't think she could pull this one off. at every single review.
No,
Why were the readers for those who haven't read the series and start at the beginning, but get this book now.
mean, I think
it's gone from the shelves.
I think you can read the book on its own, but I think you'll enjoy it more if you read the whole series.
But wait a minute. I will say paperback books have a very short shelf life. Order it now and catch up.
Please.
Yeah.
Please.
So why did you think you couldn't pull this off?
So this hero is the villain of not only the past 2 books, but also the last 20 years since the competition, since he came out on top. And there's a lot of misunderstanding of what went down 20 years ago, but there is no misunderstanding of what went down over the last 2 books. He did bad things on the page. He was a real villain for 2 books, kind of out of his mind with love and grief, because they told him that Grace, the heroine of this book, was dead. And he had let them all run, or he had assumed that when they all ran together, they would take care of her.
Mm-hmm.
And in taking care of her, they protected her so much from him that they told him she was dead. And so he went through this like mad grief. Again, think really old school, really big bananas emotions.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely no sense. A hero with no sense.
Right.
And then so he does bad things. He almost explodes one of the other heroines in the series. He almost kills one of the other heroes in the series. It's fine. They're rescued. Everyone's happy and in love. And now here he is back to win the girl and get redeemed.
Before the book starts, does he know Grace is still alive?
He finds out Grace is still alive in chapter 1.
Okay. I'm going to go back. When you were inspired to write this series,
yes,
you knew from the beginning that the Duke was going to be the hero of the 3rd book, right?
Sure.
Were you terrified?
Yes, of course, Susan.
I mean,
because here's the thing. So when I conceived of this series, Grace was so much a part of it. I loved this idea of like, you know this because we've talked about it before. I love this. First of all, I love exploring women and women's identities and the way the world treats women and the things that women have to put up with in the world. And so I loved this idea of this kind of girl who had never been able to be, who had never had it. She doesn't have a name. She has this boy's name that she was baptized with and no one ever uses. Nobody gives her name. She doesn't have an identity beyond this as a child. And then she leaves and sort of claims this big, bold world, right? She's a brothel owner. She's, she runs a criminal kind of enterprise. She has a network of spies in London. She really builds herself. She's a self-made woman. And when I started thinking about her as a heroine and these 3 boys as her, growing with her, obviously the one thing she was never given was an identity because it was owned by him. So they had to be hero and heroine. There was no other option.
Right,
I mean,
right.
Everything she had ever lost was because of him, and everything he had ever gained was taken from her.
Oh, yeah.
So
did you write in fear through this whole series?
Yes.
I'm big on writing through fear.
Me too. I'm so happy to hear you say that. I mean, I feel really strongly that the best books are the ones where you think to yourself, how is she ever going to pull it off?
Right.
Where you think to yourself, this is a really scary, as a writer, when you think this is a really scary moment. This is a really scary story. I mean, it's no surprise to anybody that I think Nobody's Baby But Mine is possibly the best romance ever written, right? So, and I think part of why I love it so much is because it looks scary from the outside. There's a lot in there that's terrifying about the way these 2 people are going to pull it, or how you as a writer are going to pull it off. And so, I'm not just here on your Facebook page blowing smoke. Like, I really do think about you and that book while I write. I think about Lisa and And dreaming of you while I write. I think about Cressley Cole while I write. You know, I think about Kennedy Ryan as I write, like, because I feel like these writers are all, you're all sort of setting the stage for how to really pull something like this off.
Well, you have, by those reader reviews, I can tell you, you pulled it off. But I got such a kick out of reading them. Where did so I'm always interested in process, in how you sort of structured in your head what was going to happen with this Bareknuckle Bastards series. I mean, you've written series before.
Yeah.
How much of it you actually knew and how much was really exploratory as you went along?
So when I propose a series to an editor, to our editor, I usually know, I have to know in order to have the series sort of fully formed in my mind. And most of my books are packaged in series. And I have to kind of know where the whole series is going, what the arc of the story is, because every series, all the books stand alone and are fine romances. But by the time you get to the end of a series, like, something important has to, I feel like I want to tell a larger story too. Mm-hmm. So for me, but I also don't plot. So that's a challenge.
I mean, I don't plot. I get that part.
Yeah.
But what is hard for me is how, when you're not a plotter, you can get this arc for the series together.
Right. So in this, so I sort of knew, I always come to characters, and then I sort of knew if Grace and Ewan were going to be the last book, and it was going to be this conversation about who you're born, what you're born into, what you make of yourself, who you are to the outside world versus who you are internally. I knew that there had to be a real push-pull between them, and it had to relate to the other characters in the story. And there is, I won't spoil it, but there is a very big event that happens that is the kind of climactic, darkest moment of the book. You know, right there where it should be in a romance novel, 95% of the way through. Mm-hmm. And I knew what that thing would be 4 years ago. Mm. And then,
because you kind of have at least some kind of direction, then you're not completely riding through the fog.
Right. As I like to describe it as, like, imagine if one morning you woke up and you had to go to the grocery store, but every road you'd ever used was blocked, was out of service. How would you get to the grocery store? And so you just sort of have to, you know, drive in the, you know, you're just sort of figuring out what the direction you're going, and you know ultimately where you have to be.
Do you get all the way to the end of a rough draft and then rework it? Or are you like me, where you're reworking constantly all the way through? And by the time you're at the end, the book is pretty much polished.
You know, I think certainly that I've done both. I am a noodler of that first 100 pages, which I think comes from, we have an editor who, you know, likes to help with those first 100 pages and sort of look at them and make sure that they are laid out. So she was my first editor. So she really taught me a lot about how the work is done. But for me, I can't move forward until those first 100 pages are finished, are really tight.
So you really know what your foundation is.
And then I can kind of blow through the next 350 pages of the manuscript. But by the end, often, you know, there's a lot to fix. You know, I don't know what everybody's damage is, and heroes have to have damage. Mm-hmm. And I never really know what their full damage is until about 80% of the way through the book. You know.
You've talked about the kind of heroine you like to talk about, and the fact that you like to work with identity in your heroines. What kind of a hero do you think is, like, just really the great? Who is the Sarah MacLean hero?
That's a good question. I like a hero who starts off really rough around the edges, and who needs to really be broken. I mean, with love.
I have no idea what you're talking about. No idea. You're a terrible person.
I'm like, destroy them, like leave them broken on the ground, let them sit in cold storage for years, and then bring them back only when they are willing to rebuild themselves in the image of the right man for the heroine, right? Like they have to, a Sarah MacLean hero has to walk through fire.
To deserve the heroine.
Yes, because heroines are amazing and they deserve to have people walk through fire for them.
Mm-hmm. That's so cool. I am with you 100%.
I know that there's like, it's not for everybody, but it really is. I mean, I talk all the time about how those old, the historicals, the big historicals of the 80s and early 90s, they like installed all my primal buttons, it feels like. So that's just that's what I love to read, and that's now what I love to write.
What was I love to embarrass you with this, but you know what? It's out there, and so you have to deal with it. Entertainment Weekly called you Gracefully Furious.
Yes.
I love this so much because
put it on
I know what that's about. I know what that's about.
Yeah, it was about romance novels.
It's about romance novels. It's about your view of women.
Mm-hmm.
And you're extremely articulate about it, but you're never mean about it. That's where I think the gracefully part comes in.
Yeah, I mean, I try. That actually happened because should I tell the quick story of why that happened? Boy, it was a while ago. It was before my daughter was born. So it was maybe 7 or 8 years ago. The New York Times Book Review did an issue, and it was the entire issue is dedicated to sex and how books tackled sex. And they did there was a massive, like 7 or 8 page, long form piece where they talked to 17 authors about writing sex, and not one of them was a romance novelist. And I was
bonkers.
You guys, sometimes like people say like, where were you when Kennedy was shot? Like, I can remember how hot I was feeling. I was sitting outside my coffee shop around the corner from my house, and I vividly remember just going stratospheric. I mean, like fury. And because I just couldn't believe it. It was, I mean, if there's sorry, I think my phone is beeping at you.
That's right, mine does it too.
The one thing that we are always dragged on the carpet for
is sex.
Is the fact that our books are sexy, and like, aren't they just porn for women? And I mean, I just lost my mind. And also because none of these other writers, and I'm sure many of them are fine writers, really write sex as a matter of course, and write sex as a plot point and as a character building device and all the things that we use sex for in the books. None of them really answered any of the questions correctly as far as I was concerned.
So what did you do, Sarah?
So I wrote a very strongly worded letter
to the New York Times.
The New York Times, and I said, what the hell are you people doing over there?
They didn't publish it, did they?
They did publish it, and it was great, and it was gracefully furious. And then what was really wonderful is that from that, I think my letter, the Times asked me to then write a roundup of romance for them. And then the Washington Post asked, they sort of came in and said, well, would you write a column for us? And then, we moved forward from there. Entertainment Weekly interviewed me, and that's where that came from. And it just felt so inane that no one at the time said, oh, what about romance?
What I think, there's an interesting aspect of this story that you might not have thought of, because we are of different generations, and we've talked about this.
Yeah.
Because I was first published in the early 1980s, and there was a group of us who were carrying the standard at that point.
Mm-hmm.
We were the gracefully furious, except mainly furious. And we were writing to the editors, and our pal Jane Ann Krentz put together the wonderful volume of essays called Dangerous Men, Adventurous Women, because all of the research on romance, some of you may not know this, all the research on romance was coming from the academic community, not from writers. And Jane had it up to here. And so she plunged in, and we put this academic book together where we talked about the various aspects of romance and got it published through Jane by a university press, the University of Pennsylvania Press. So once this work is published by an academic press, everybody who wrote about romance in the academy had to cite this book. And so we were always the ones writing the letters, and we got worn out.
Yeah, it's exhausting. The battle is exhausting.
It was exhausting, and Sarah MacLean, among others, but Sarah
There
MacLean
were others, yes.
And I remember Jane and I talking like, oh, can we just breathe now and let the next generation of writers make the next step forward? And it's fascinating because my generation, we got romance recognized by the Academy. Your generation is really getting this respectful recognition of romance in more popular media.
Yeah, it really is starting to. And look, I think this is a lot about the fact that your generation opened so many doors for us. We didn't have to fight the fight that we didn't have to fight to get even noticed. We were being noticed, and then it was just a matter of like twisting, just sort of turning the gaze.
It was a big turn
to a certain
Get
extent.
the New York Times and the Washington Post to recognize this genre.
Yeah,
we didn't even try that. We didn't even go there.
No, I mean, the sort of legendary stories about like all the lists being manipulated so that romance wouldn't actually dominate all the lists. And, those kinds of the history of romance. The work that I would really like to see as I hate the word legacy, but legacy is that I'd really like to see a really real history of the genre put together, because I think we are lost to history in the way that a lot of things that are largely centered around women are lost to history. And you guys are the people who were fighting this fight are still here. And I want to make sure that the stories of that
before
fight,
we die.
Well, that's going to be a long time from now, but
one of the places that our history is being carried on is at the Bowling Green State University Library of Popular Culture. For example, they have all my archival materials, which is called cleaning out your drawers. And a number of us do that.
Yeah.
But, I've seen you be very active in this. And one of the things, you've done a lot of things to help preserve the history of the genre. Talk a little bit about the old school.
Yeah, the book club. So I have a Facebook book club, which you guys can all search right now. It's actually, it's just, if you search OSRBC, which stands for Old School Romance Book Club, you'll find it and you should join. And it's now almost 8,000 members strong. And it started as me really wanting to make sure that readers were aware of the genre's history, of like the books that came before now. And it was largely because I was reading, I've always reread those books that really changed me as a reader and made me a romance reader. And I wanted to talk to people about them. And I couldn't just call you all the time and say, can we talk about your books? So I brought together a group of readers, and at the beginning it was only a couple hundred, and now it's 8,000. And you cannot keep up with OSRBC. It's so massive.
It's big now.
And now it's 8,000 members strong, and there are about 200 new posts a day. And it's, if you've ever sort of thought, oh, I wonder if I'll never be able to find that book I remember from reading 20 years ago. If you post that to Old School,
find it.
They'll tell someone there will know.
Yeah.
It's really it's just a fun community. But what we've done there is really continue. It's a place where news about romance is posted, where history, cool things that people find in their houses, in their libraries, at the tag sale down the street, get posted there. It's really an archive in its own way. And then of course there's the podcast too, where I have a podcast that's out every Wednesday called Fated Mates. And
Fated Mates, FATEDMATES, Fated Mates.
The trope, the classic romance trope. And it started out as a love letter to Cressley Cole's Immortals After Dark series with my friend Jen, who's a romance critic and an academic. And now it's really a podcast where we read the books that we think really are transformative for the genre, because no one talks about the books. they want to talk about the sex. They want to talk about, well, don't these set high expectations for women? And, aren't these all just silly books
Right.
for moms?
And I have heard your podcast, and for those of you out there who haven't listened to Fated Mates, when Sarah and Jen talk about these books, they go deep into the book. This isn't just a surface talking about what the plot is. They look at the books both as readers and kind of as academics too, which is really, really interesting. They also use dirty words, so put your headphones on if the kids are around.
Sorry, I mean, so do the books, but but we did an episode on Nobody's Baby But Mine, and it was really a love letter. I mean, it was, the analysis was very much like, oh my God, it's so good. But
that was so funny because I'm listening to it as I'm walking on my headphones and I am blushing. I'm getting embarrassed. I turn it off for a little bit and then I put it back on again.
But it was a great, I mean, I don't want to rehash that episode. You should all go listen to it. But there were so many really interesting things. Look, the reality is that when you read a romance novel for the first time, you're not thinking about it as an academic, right? You're thinking about it as just a reader. You're just enjoying it. And for years and years, I've reread that book as just a reader, just thinking, just enjoying it, letting myself go in it. But this time, just reading it as a writer, as somebody who's to think about it and really talk about it, I had this moment where I was like, Susan is making choices here that are overt, clear, or maybe they weren't overt, but they were clear statements on the world. And I mean, I love that about romance. I love that the books tell a story about the world that we're living in, even when you're writing about, a woman and an NFL player in the mountains, or you're writing about, your current book also in the mountains, but with like a street artist and a
midwife.
A midwife, thank you. Or when you're writing about, 3 fairy tale born children to a, evil duke in the 1830s.
That's what I was going to say. I think readers are going to be rereading your books for those very, very same things. Can we go back to the idea of what kind of books were you reading as a child, and what was your entry point into the romance genre?
Sure. I read everything. I read anything I could get my hands on. I was a voracious reader and like a very weird kid. And my mom never had any rules about, I hear from these people, these mothers now that I have a 6-year-old, I hear, from moms who take their kids to the library, RIP libraries. I can't wait to take my child back to the library.
No.
But I hear from other moms, well, they're only allowed to take 3 books out every time we go. And I'm like, why? The books are here. They're free. Take as many as you want. And my mom never had those rules for me. So I would come home with, 40 picture books and just read them constantly. So I didn't have, there are a couple of sort of, I guess, cornerstone texts for me. I really loved Tuck Everlasting, which is probably a good example of where it was a good signpost for where I was going.
About what age was that? About when did you really fall in love with that book?
Gosh, well, I can remember just reading it until the cover fell off. So, it must have been 8 or 9,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then my sister, who was 10 years older than me, was a real romance reader. And she would come home. She was in college, when I was 9, she was off to college. So she came home, and during the summers, she would read romances, and we shared a room, much to her dismay. And she would shove them under her bed, and I would pull them out. And by the time I was 10 or 11, I was reading romances. Lost. Yeah, lost. The first for me was Jude Devereux's The Black Lion.
Oh my
goodness. Is still, I read it every year. I read it whenever I need a comfort read. I go to it because, again, it sort of installed my buttons. Mm-hmm. It's a wild book. If you've never read it, it's wild and comes with all the warnings that a book from the 80s should come with, but it's amazing. And then, from Devereux, it was, then I just found the library, and I just read every book that had Fabio on it. And then I read every book that looked like it might have Fabio on it. And then I moved to you, and I moved to, other Judith McNaught, who never had anybody on her covers. I only just realized that she was fighting the cover fight, which is really interesting.
No, The first edition of Whitney, My Love, unless I'm wrong, I think there was a woman's face on that.
Oh, really?
I
Okay.
think that's in my
No.
head. I think that they should reissue all of those Joanna Lindsay's with the original covers.
Me too. I've been saying that. Wouldn't that be amazing with all those Fabio covers?
Beautiful.
Oh my God. I want to, and they should put it out in a box set, and I would throw money at HarperCollins.
Yeah, I know.
Pay attention, HarperCollins.
Everybody, email Avon Books and tell them you want them to reissue all of those old Joanna Lindsay's with the Fabio cover.
Oh my God. There really should be like a Mallory box set. You know,
I bet
there should be a Chicago
Avon
Stars
Books
box set.
got even 5 emails about that, they could do it. Because sometimes they'll react to one single email.
I know.
Yeah. Avon, do you know what their email address is off the top of your head? I don't.
I don't.
Google it. Avon Romance. Google it. Say you want the Joanna Lindsay's with the Fabio covers.
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
This would be fun. We could start a revolution.
Here we are, trendsetters.
I know. So I didn't know you did YA, didn't you?
My first book was a YA novel. Yeah. Because it was written on a dare, Susan. I didn't ever intend to be a writer. That was never I never thought I could. And I had a friend, I worked in New York, and I worked for a very sort of posh literary publicity company. And I worked for...
She has got stories that I know, but she will not tell them.
I won't tell them, but
they are juicy.
I worked for a really posh company, and my boss, I mean, so posh that I was the person who hid what I read. You know, I would, because I was afraid that if she knew that I wrote romance novels, like that would be the end of that. She'd never give me a big author. She'd never let me, advance. So, but because, publishing is a very small world, and there's a lot of community in it, I knew people who worked in children's publishing, and at the time Twilight had just come out and was really, really, I mean, a juggernaut. And we were out one night, and I was like, I really feel like, and somebody said, oh, YA is going to be a huge thing. You watch, like YA is it's the next Harry Potter. Twilight's Harry Potter. YA is going to be a thing. And I was like, I feel like I could, I feel like a teenager still. I was a teenager, basically. I was 22 or 23. And I wrote the season. And I had just enough alcohol, and they were like, I dare you. And I went home and I wrote the first chapter of the season. And then it was trying to prove that I could, right? It was, it was just a fun thing to do. And then when it was done, I had a book. And it got published. I mean, a lot of the first draft was nothing really like what ended up happening to that book, but it got published. And then once that was done, I sort of thought, well, I want to write what I love, which was romance. So I wrote 9 Rules to Break When Romancing a Rake. And then
was that your first romance that you wrote? So your first book was published, your first romance.
It was. I took a romance writing class online, right at the beginning of online classes. I can think of where I was living. So I must have been right around then, 22, 23. And I tried to write, the part of the class was the promise of the class was that you would come away with 100 pages of a romance novel. And I wrote 100 pages of a contemporary that was designed to be a Harlequin, like a category romance. But the heroine's a bartender, and the hero begins with the hero dead drunk at her bar, like sitting at her bar. And the teacher read the first page and immediately emailed the whole thing back to me and said, no one will ever buy a book where the hero's drunk on the first page. And I was like, oh. And so I just stopped writing it, because I just was like, I mean, talk about being easy to crush, right? I mean, come on, Sarah. Yeah, but but
when you're young and you're just starting out, you are easy to crush.
I was like, oh, well, I guess maybe then this is not for me. What's interesting is that really stuck with me. And I have since written several books that begin with the hero drunk on the page.
Good for you.
And I'm doing fine.
I don't know who you took that online course for, but I can pretty much guarantee that your career has gone a lot farther than these. So you went right from
wait, I just want to say, so if you are writing something and somebody has said to you, like, you'll never sell that broke a rule, you can never have a hero do this, or never have a heroine do that, or whatever. Never start a book with weather. I'm not going to say what I want to say because this is a family show, but just keep writing.
And my experience was you cannot write about sports, music. There was a third. I can't remember what third one.
Movie stars.
Oh,
is it movie stars?
Movie stars, sports, and music. Rock singers.
Mhm.
I have written about all three of them. But the thing is, when I started my first sports book, which was actually Fancy Pants, I didn't know the rule.
Right.
Didn't know the rule. And that was such a gift because I did not take any classes.
Gosh, me too. My first romance was 9 Rules. And I didn't know that a book couldn't be 130,000 words. That book is way longer than most books. And I just didn't know. I didn't know any of I didn't know that you couldn't title a book the way that
was a great title.
But it was so long. I mean, now looking at it, like it shouldn't have existed.
That title, and that I still remember that because that title leaped right off the shelves because it was different.
Yeah, it was really silly and long, and I mean, you never know. Somebody out there, it's so much about, it's about skill, but it's also about timing and about luck, and like somebody out there wants your book.
Yeah. That is true. But I mean, saying that, you still have to master craft.
Yes.
You have to master craft.
Well, we've had this conversation 1,000 times.
I'm big on that. Master craft. Don't load down your first chapter with the entire backstory for the whole book. I was just talking to a reader who said, I really like this writer because she jumps right into the story. And, when I've done writing workshops with newer writers, one of the first things I do is I say, I've never read your manuscript, but I tell you right now, get rid of your first chapter. Your book starts with chapter 2.
Yes, Susan, that is a great piece of advice. And I think about that advice coming out of your mouth all the time.
Well,
chapter 1 is just when you're and your sea legs.
I failed in public with that. For example, one of the books I love is a book called Hot Shot. Hot Shot has a slow beginning.
Yeah, but that was...
Read Hot Shot. I know it's got a little bit of a slow beginning, but just stick with it. It doesn't last that long.
But you were learning one, and also, Susan, like the rules are, I mean, for all that we've thrown out the rules in 2020 are not the same as the rules in 1985.
Yeah.
Like they're just not. The beginning of I think about the beginning of like so many of those McNaught books had 100 pages of just exposition and backstory.
Right. Yeah.
And then you sort of leap into the story on page, 102.
Readers were more patient then. And also because it's not like thousands of romance novels were being published.
No.
You were willing, with those early books, you were willing to go through all that backstory and wade through all that to get to the story. So there were a couple of aspects to it. So if you had to give just a couple writing tips to anybody here who's new to writing, what would your tips be?
Well, the first one is probably a cheat, but the most important, I think, and that's read. I think if you're writing your first romance novel right now, and your goal is a career, your goal is to sell it and, make some money and live a life. You really should be reading what's popular now, what's big, the authors who are really out there and like getting a lot of attention and getting great reviews and getting, you should just be reading. You should know when somebody says like, oh, this reminds me of the Kiss Quotient. You should know what that means. You should know what the hating game is when people talk about rom-coms. Those are books right now that people are thinking about. And then also the big books of the past, the big books that made the genre. Those are all valuable because they're so full of the tropes that we love. And it's so much easier to peel back all the pieces and really see in those older books what the trope does, like what the work does. Mm-hmm. Which brings me to my second one, which is know your tropes, right? Even if you're writing a book that doesn't seem to really fit into tropes, great romances are tropey for a reason. Readers love a trope. That's what keeps the pacing fast. It's what keeps readers excited about what's to come. So, I'm writing this wild book about a villain turned hero and a lady who owns a woman's pleasure club, and it's basically one endless grovel, but ultimately it's childhood love to enemies to lovers, right? And so what the promise of the premise is on that. So know your tropes, try and figure out how to pack them into your book.
And for those of you who don't know what a trope is, it's like marriage of convenience.
Right.
Secret
Enemies
baby.
to lovers.
Enemies to lovers. Those are just those are the foundation of almost every great romance.
Yeah.
And every romance that's not great. It's just how we work.
Yeah.
So before we stop, tell us a little bit about where you are on social so that readers who want to follow your brilliance can follow you.
Sure. I don't use Facebook as a person very much. I use, obviously, OSRBC is the book club. I'm in there.
Old School Romance Book Club.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But if you search, it's not called that anymore because it's not just about old school. So it's OSRBC is what you should search. And come and join me there and join our community of romance readers. It's really fun. I'm on Twitter at Sarah MacLean, all one word. I'm on Instagram at Sarah MacLean, all one word. You can find me at my podcast, Fated Mates, at fatedmates.net. And that's me.
Such a busy woman. Hold up Darian the Duke again.
Yes, you can buy this gorgeous yellow covered beauty. The heroine, the model, this woman, she was Miss New York 2 years ago.
Whoa.
In Miss America. So,
well, it's great. And Sarah's Bareknuckle Bastards series has been phenomenal.
Thank you.
And you may want to read it in order, but whatever you do, get this book now before it disappears from shelves. Sarah,
Susan,
I love talking to you.
Thank you so much. This is always a true joy. Anytime we can sit and chat. This was really fun.
After I talk to you, it's just like I just want to run to my computer and write. You always raise me up. You raise me up. So anyway, thank you all so much, and thanks everybody
for joining.
Thanks
for watching.
Yes, bye-bye.
Bye.